This is Scott Duck with Scott Duck Ministries. And today, what I'd like to talk to you about is chasing after ease. You know, often in our lives, we just wish things could be easier. We find ourselves often wanting more and better than we have. And if we're really honest about it, that's often what we're after in our relationship with Christ, isn't it? Oh, we may not consciously think about it that way, but we often enter into a relationship with Him, many of us do. We enter into a relationship, or what we call a relationship, that's woefully one-sided. Often we don't really expend much, if any, effort on figuring out how we can serve Him, but rather we try to figure out what He can do for us and how we can get Him to do that. We sure don't want to do or go through anything hard, and unfortunately many people in ministry support this perspective. Some of them just support it by just simply not pushing back against it, and some of them support it by actively promoting it. This has led to a brand of Christianity where many of the people are lukewarm in their relationship with Christ at best. And I'm not going to go into it today in this video, but being a lukewarm Christian isn't good. Take a look at what Jesus said about lukewarm Christians in Revelation 3:14. Now, like I said, we're not going to go into that in this video, but take a look at it. It's not good. And we may do a separate video on that at a later time. So anyway, back to this idea of wanting things to be easier. Oftentimes, our wanting things to be easier involves wanting more money. And so I'm going to talk about this from that perspective for a while, but the exact same principles that I'm going to talk about here apply to other things too. Wanting more respect, better health, whatever it may be. So, oftentimes wanting things to be easier involves wanting more money. And this makes what's often referred to as the prosperity gospel attractive to many people. These people are not bad people at all. Many of them are genuinely good people who really love God. But in their normal human nature, they want more and better than they have, like most of us do. And so a doctrine that teaches them that pursuing the God they love can give them the things they want naturally is very appealing to them. There's only one problem. The prosperity gospel is a lie. I recently saw a sermon video on YouTube by Joel Osteen. And I'm going to pick on him just for a minute just because I just recently saw this video, but a lot of people in ministry do this type of thing now. And this sermon was titled, "Ease is Coming." And he basically was talking about the fact that if you're going through something hard, don't worry about it because God's going to make it easier for you. And that was pretty much the extent of it. He didn't say anything about how you might need to honor God, about how your relationship with Christ needs to be as a Christian, how maybe you should serve Him. I think just once or twice he simply said, keep honoring God. And he mostly talked about situations where people were in less than ideal situations and their situation turned around. He didn't say anything about how that was used to glorify God or most of the time or anything like that. This is a popular perspective. Again, I'm only picking on him just because I very recently saw that video. But many people push this type of thing. There are at least 2 books that I'm aware of that have come out in the last 3 years, both titled Anointment of Ease. So this is a very popular perspective. But nowhere in Scripture is this type of thing, the prosperity gospel, or us receiving any kind of anointment of ease. Nowhere is this taught in Scripture. Again, continuing with the idea of wanting more money and looking at it from that perspective. God may not want us to have a lot of money, because not having a lot of money helps to keep us dependent on Him. Look at what happened with Israel in Exodus chapter 16. When they were wandering in the wilderness, when Israel was wandering in the wilderness, God provided manna for them to eat. And the way He did that was the manna was there on the ground every morning. And God told them only to gather up as much as they needed for that day, not to save it. And they couldn't save it, because if they did gather up more than they needed for that particular day, it would rot by the next morning. So it didn't do them any good to gather up more than that. And so and the only time that they could gather up more than one day's worth was just before the Sabbath. They could gather up 2 days' worth so that they would have enough provisions for the Sabbath, and they weren't supposed to work on that day. He did this in order to keep them dependent on them. He only gave them what they needed for their immediate needs for that one day. And I think He often provides for us in the same way and for the same reason. Look at Hosea chapter 13, verse 6. This was God talking about Israel. And He said, "When I fed them, they were satisfied. When they were satisfied, they became proud. Then they forgot me." And this was talking about Israel. And it's very easy for us to look back on some of the stuff that went on with Israel and to judge them for it. But if we're honest, when it comes right down to it, many of us act exactly the same way they did. I know I do a lot of the time. When things are easy and we have plenty, we tend to forget about God. Or if not forget about Him altogether, we certainly tend not to pay nearly as much attention to Him. So oftentimes we're actually better off with things being not as good as we would like them to be. Look at Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 3. It says, "Sorrow is better than laughter, for by a sad countenance the heart is made better." These words were written by King Solomon, who was the wisest man to have ever lived. He had wisdom given to him by God. And I used to read that and think that, wisest man in history or not, Solomon must have been having an off day there. But over time, God and experience, and God teaching me through my experience, has taught me that this really is true. And I think most people, grow in my relationship with God most in the hard times, not the good times, not the easy times. Look at what God said to Paul in 2 Corinthians 12:9. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness." God's strength really is made perfect in weakness. And this isn't just true of financial weakness. That's, financial things is what I've been talking about for the last little bit here. But like I said, these same principles I've been talking about apply to everything. This same thing has applied to me with regard to physical weakness, with regard to my blindness and things that I've gone to as a result of that. This applies to many types of weakness. God's strength truly is made perfect in weakness. And I'm not trying to say that God doesn't answer prayer. He does answer prayer very often when it's to His glory and when it's really what's best for us. I've talked about that in a lot of my writing, in other videos and articles in my books. But so God will take care of us, but often He gives us just what we need for the moment in order to help keep us dependent on Him. And that's because He knows we're better off that way. Scripture does not teach that things will be easy for followers of Christ. In fact, a theme that runs throughout Scripture is that life often will be much harder for those of us who follow Christ, at least while we're in this world. Things will be much harder for us than for many of the people who don't follow him. Look at what Jesus said to his disciples in Matthew chapter 16, verse 24. If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. So Jesus said that if anyone would come after him, if anyone would follow him, truly follow him, in other words, that we must deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow him. And notice that he said if anyone would follow him. He didn't say just some people. Anybody, in order to be a true follower of his, has to do this. We have to take up our cross and follow him. Now, granted, for most of us, taking up our cross isn't as dramatic as anything as dramatic as it was for him. But it is more dramatic than most of us tend to have in mind when we start following him. Taking up our cross is dealing with the struggles in our everyday life and yet remaining true to him. It's sacrificing absolutely whatever we have to in order to do what he asks of us. It's repenting of those pet sins that we like to hang on to while trying to tell ourselves that we're okay. It's struggling to live in this sinful world, but not being of that world so that we can serve as his light to that world. What all this comes down to is making a conscious choice and a conscious effort to put Jesus first, above all else, period. But the majority of us don't do this the majority of the time. We put ourselves first, and what we're looking for is that anointment of ease. And you may not have watched the sermons or read the books that I talked about earlier, and you may not, you may not really follow the prosperity gospel. A lot of people do, but a lot of people don't. But even if you don't, chances are pretty good that you do what I did for a long time and what I still tend to do if I don't depend on God daily to keep me grounded. And that is that I tend to pursue ease a little too much. And chances are pretty good that you do too, because we all tend to do it. It's human nature. But I want to challenge you to chase him, chase God, not ease. Ultimately, you'll be better off for it. Things may or may not be better in this life because of it. But I guarantee you that things will be better off in the eternal scheme of things. And in the end, after all, isn't that what really matters? Thank you for watching. If this video has blessed you, I'd ask you to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.